Welcome back to Off the Pitch, the podcast where we chat with individuals working within and shaping the game of soccer from off the pitch. Today's guest is James Keston. James is not only the CEO, but also the owner of USL Championship side Orange County Soccer Club. James gave us the full rundown on what it was like to purchase a then struggling Orange County Blues FC, rebrand it, and ultimately rebuild it into what is now known as OCSC. He also broke down their unique business model, shared what it was like to bring in over $500,000 in fan fundraising, and much, much more. This episode is a true behind the scenes of what it's like to not only own, but also run the day-to-day operations of a professional soccer club. I know that you're going to learn a thing or two from this episode, so without further ado, let's get into it. All right, James, thank you again for joining us and spending some time with us today. As I mentioned before we came on, you've been a difficult man to do research on and learn a bit about yourself, at least pre, what we're going to talk about now with Orange County. So if you don't mind just spending a bit of time to kick us off and just give a bit of a rundown on sort of what, who you are as a person and what has led to up until the point of buying Orange County, and what your career looked like up to that point.
Yeah, absolutely. I grew up in Los Angeles. Born and raised, and went to school out in Michigan for a couple years, and then down in Atlanta for a couple years. I was an investment banker for a year. Got very involved. Just happened to be coming up at the right time when the internet was debuting, which ages me a little bit, but worked with the Verizon guy under the partner's desk to figure out how to make the internet work, and 6 months later was starting up a internet company that eventually years later was sold. So that kind of is where I got my business start. I was actually a Peace Corps volunteer in Guatemala for 2 years. Went to business school at NYU, and the rest has mostly been kind of corporate experience. A lot in real estate and investments, but was very involved in soccer, just was a soccer fan at the right time. Grew up, when I was, 16, we qualified for the World Cup for the first time, 14. And then, 98, the World Cup was here. And I got to go to a lot of games and just completely fell in love with the game, everything about it. And then over the years, I worked in Paris, I lived in Guatemala, I studied abroad in Spain, and just, really fell in love and saw what the game is all around the world and the passion for it. I actually owned the rights to Seattle and to expansion in MLS in Seattle and Portland in 2006, 2007, which was a very interesting and a different MLS, obviously, at that time, a league that was struggling a lot. And suffice it to say, 2007, 2008, the real estate market had some problems, and I was involved in helping out some of those problems with a couple companies, and somebody else stepped in, and, the rest is history. I cried myself to sleep for a while. Went on with my life, got married, had kids, started to hear about USL around 2013, 2014, and just started sniffing around and found there was a team in Orange County that, was struggling a lot, put it that way, and decided this is the chance. If I don't do it now, I'm never going to do it. So just kind of jumped in with both feet, and we had 3 employees. We played at a backfield at UC Irvine with concrete steps for seats in front of 150 people, and, took my wife to see the first game, and I said, you just have to imagine. And she had trouble with that, but eventually we went ahead with it anyway, and we spent the last 8 years kind of building the club up and turning it into what it's become, and it's it's been a joy It's been a passion project, but it's also been a lot of work and a lot of grinding.
Oh no, I'm sure, and especially to go from 3 employees to what it is now is spectacular and definitely not a passive thing. After I guess after things fell through with Portland, which sounds like that'd be tough for anyone to lose that, especially having seen what that club has gone on to do with the Timbers in that area and how much they love the game. Once that ended, did the dream of owning a club end then? Or I know you picked it back up. Did you know you were just going to curb it for a while and look back into it, or what happened there?
Hindsight is obviously a very difficult thing to deal with. I always tell the story that in Seattle, we were told that, the club will never succeed because they'll never build their own stadium. And they projected like 11,000, 12,000 in attendance the first year. And obviously, it was, I think, 3 to 4 times that in their first year. And, as among the most successful sports franchise launches in the last 50 years. So, there's a certain extent to which nobody knows anything. But did I know I would be back? No, I think until I started to read about USL and felt like, the opportunity at that point in my life kind of matched with my values, and then kind of what I'm sure we'll talk about. Obviously, what's different with us is that from the beginning, we were dedicated to a player development and transfer model and really kind of linked ourselves to Europe and to European clubs. And, there's obviously a lot of skepticism, even in our own league when that started, but that's proven to be pretty successful. And really, USL as a whole has really kind of pivoted in that way to start making this a player development league, ultimately for movement on to European clubs, because MLS is a different sort of entity.
Yeah, we recently had Brett Johnson on from Rhode Island, and he's extremely bullish on the potential that the league has to really be that development step for people that are in the country and looking to move on, that maybe can't break into MLS sides, or people that want to come over on loan or come over and develop for a while. And it's clear that you guys are sort of paving the way for how to go about that. I guess when you were taking over the club again, we've had Brad on, we've had Stephen Aldrich on from the Roots, 2 people who have been there from the beginning with their clubs. So we've gotten to learn a lot about, building from the ground up on that side of things, but we haven't had anyone that's purchased a club. I mean, Brett has Ipswich, but he was part of a big group that got involved there. But what did that process look like of, eyeing up this club that is struggling? And what does that sort of step by step go from just seeing a club and then actually you're now the owner? What does that look like?
I think USL was just, when I started looking, was probably early 2014. And it's kind of amazing to look back. USL was just such a different league, and it had such a different ownership base. There were a lot more mom and pops, kind of very small entities. There weren't really soccer specific stadiums. And it wasn't like we were dealing with a large revenue base, or, a lot of other complex things as inputs going into thinking about what you're going to do. It's really all about putting together a model, that you can believe in. I always say that for Orange County, all I bought was soccer real estate. I didn't know anything else about anything. I knew, 25 to 30% of soccer players on the national team over the last 25 years came from basically Southern California, south of LA. And, probably 3 or 4 of the top 10 clubs in the United States, youth clubs, are in Orange County and in San Diego. But other than that, there wasn't much at that point. Infrastructure, it was more of kind of the idea that you want to be in the right place at the right time and do it professionally and do it with a little bit of passion. And, things will hopefully turn out your way.
And I'm sure, I mean, I know when you took over the club, it had a different name It had a different brand, a different identity. I think it was Orange County Blues FC, and then you've obviously changed it into Orange County Soccer Club. So I guess that's another, give us a bit of a behind the scenes there of deciding that the Blues wasn't the right thing, the right identity, and then kind of how you came up with what is now a brand identity that's got a lot of now history a bit behind it and building on that.
Yeah, as I'm sure you know, up until recently, most American sports teams really kind of went with some sort of, animal or mascot related name. Obviously in football, it's different. For us, ultimately, the Blues was not something specifically that came out of kind of Orange County history, lore, community. And at the end of the day, when you're starting almost a new club from scratch, it really is about what can you identify with as a brand. And Orange County itself is a brand. It's something that's, globally and nationally recognized. It's a place that instantly calls up, memories and the theme song of the OC and a number of other things that, people identify with. And so that really was the thinking behind it, is make Orange County the star. You know, Orange County is a very kind of strange place insofar as it's in between the San Diego and Los Angeles mega markets and media markets. So it's obviously about 3.2 million people and then another, 4 million plus in the Inland Empire, but it still kind of exists in its own little world. And then within each city in Orange County, you have a lot of different bubbles. So it's a very, very different type of place. And most teams outside of the Ducks have not really run towards the name of Orange County. So we felt like that was something, if we're going to be the Orange County soccer team, we're going to say it with pride and we're going to identify with it. And we want our fans and sponsors and everybody else to know that this is where we're from. We're not looking to LA. We're not looking south. We're looking right in this heart of Orange County.
Yeah, no, that's great. Really honing in on what the area is, and obviously for anyone that's not familiar with the brand identity and colors, making orange kind of the forefront of it all makes a lot more sense than blue.
Yes.
Just even that it's in the name. I guess when you took over the club, so you saw things that were struggling. You saw, I'm sure, a lot of room for improvement. What were some of those initial, I guess short-term goals in terms of quickly turning things around, over the next 12, 18, 24 months? And then what were some of the longer term goals that you're maybe now hitting that sort of timeline, 8, 10 years later?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think from the beginning, it was develop a player development pathway. It was find a new stadium to play in. And it was kind of build a world-class organization, which, when you're starting from zero is a little bit easier because you really are kind of a blank slate. So it really is about, again, Orange County is different from a lot of other players. I think arguably there are more youth soccer players, especially if you include female players in and around Orange County, than just about anywhere else in the US. But it's also very youth club centered and focused. And, when we started, we were really having completely different types of conversations, not only about, having a stadium and having a professional team and what is USL, to, nearly all parents you spoke to 8, 10 years ago were saying, I want my kid to get a scholarship to go to college. That's why we're playing soccer. And obviously, probably even 5 years after that, that conversation is completely flipped on its head. And at this point, for the most part, college is not a pathway for elite players that want to play professionally at all anymore. And parents know that. And it's a process that's starting at 14 and 15 of deciding that, you're going to be a professional player. You're going to put yourself in a professional pathway. And most importantly for USL, which is what I've always believed is the great advantage over certainly an MLS system, is that the mix of playing with a majority of grown men is what makes all the difference and what shows who can survive at the next level out of a 16-year-old compared to who can't, and also teaches them how to be a pro, how to show up for work every day. We have a mix of guys that played in everything from the Premier League to, Danish and Norwegian first divisions. So to, pros that have been in USL and MLS for years. And it really is becoming a pro over a certain period of time. The work ethic, the attitude, it's the most important thing. It's what they have to learn even more than the skills.
I know you mentioned just a little bit ago about how it's 25 to 30% of the national team players have come from Orange County. I think specifically the Irvine Strikers account for probably 20% of everything as well. And I know the Irvine Strikers is one of the biggest clubs in the country, as well as not just one of the most successful clubs in the country. So my question to you is, with this strategy of player development and youth player development being your long-term goal and your goal just in general for the club when you purchased it, was that your goal when you were looking at other clubs from the beginning? And then also, was that something you considered when you settled on Orange County? Did you look at how successful the youth soccer experience was in Orange County, or were you looking at other places and to find that type of experience as well?
I mean, I think obviously strikers, slammers, surf, you got a lot of very strong long-term brands there, but also, we were really the first club to come in and say, look, we are not looking to run a youth club. We have enough work to do creating a professional club with a professional pathway and a full-time reserve team. We want the 1% of the 1% that have a chance of not only playing pro for us, but that's not the goal. The goal is we want them, thinking about Europe. They want to play on the highest levels, the biggest teams. B, we want them playing for the U.S. men's national team, and we want them to be dreaming about that from the day they get to us. So with those two goals in mind, it really was, there's never been that much of a conflict. For us, we didn't want to start a youth soccer club, and other teams, a lot of them that do it is because their communities are not very well organized and they struggle to identify talent and bring soccer players in, let alone talented ones at a young age. That's never been the problem in Orange County. So we're just very, it's the best part of what I enjoy, because I was here to prove that American players are, the most undervalued asset in all of global soccer. And the only way to do that is to focus on the 1% at the 16, 17, 18-year-old level, not get below that and worry about which coach is going to pick up and take which youth team somewhere else.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I mean, especially, I come from the UK, where, to your point of college kind of moving away from being the sort of natural pathway, I think that's definitely, I mean, you see it firsthand yourself, but I think it's spot on. And it's always the thing that I've had to almost educate people. When I moved here and played college soccer, was that, we'd come over and people would wonder why, individuals from, Spain and Germany and France that come over to play college aren't going pro. It's because they weren't good enough to go pro. And so they go to college because those that are good enough have been identified 5 years prior. For the most part, which 14, 15, 16-year-olds are actually cut out for it and have the potential, versus college being graduating at 22 and then going pro. You've missed the boat in pretty much every other country in the world at 22 to go pro, aside from stories like Jamie Vardy and the like that, somehow slip through the cracks. But I think that's definitely a very different model, I'm sure, especially going back, 8 years ago, and sort of building the philosophy around that sort of player development. And we've clearly seen, in what I've read, definitely sort of the transfer fees and the financial side that has come from building a business model around that philosophy. So how how was that received, when you were pitching it to people, other individuals, owners in the league, kind of responding to this very different philosophy as a club, but also the financial side? Because I'm sure 8 years ago, USL was not seen as a high, sponsorship opportunity. It of course is now, 8 years later, and I'm sure you're reaping a lot of benefits of that. But in terms of going sort of putting all your eggs in the basket of player development, well, how well or not well was that received in 2016?
I mean, in all honesty, it really was not something that anybody else was really talking about at all. So I think, the general opinion was, look, it's your money. You can do with it whatever you want. But if I were you, I would focus on selling hot dogs and beers, which is what I heard a lot. And, I come from a financial background and, understanding, having been around European clubs and understanding the business models there, what's interesting, obviously, about it is, you generally have an upfront transfer fee, then you have potential bonuses based upon how a player performs. But the biggest piece is that secondary transfer, and we retain a piece of the secondary transfer for every player that we sell. And that really is, ultimately betting on American players, betting on American soccer, but also doing it the right way so that you're developing players that have a good chance to go on, but most likely they're not going to Man City or Liverpool or Barcelona. They're going to what you would consider kind of feeder clubs for the larger clubs, places where they're going to have a better chance to get on the field, where they're going to get more focus and training, but where their secondary transfer is going to be to one of the top clubs in the world. And that's, it's certainly not for the faint of heart, but it's exciting, and it ultimately is, fits with my vision of what I'd like to see out of American soccer, which is winning a World Cup, seeing our players playing in the Champions League, and, feeling again that American players are a spectacular asset in global football, and they just haven't had the chance to consistently get those opportunities.
Yeah, I'm sure that's a much more exciting business model to be a part of. It's putting a lot more risk on your own shoulders. But I mean, I had, and David was as well. We were involved with a NISA club a couple of years back, and our business model was based on selling the hot dogs. We couldn't even sell beer. It was at a high school field, so we couldn't sell beer. That's maybe why the club went bankrupt, because we couldn't capitalize on Modelo's as well. But yeah, I think definitely a lot more exciting. And I know I read that you've formed partnerships with European clubs to even further that pathway specifically for Orange County. So I know you've got partnerships with Rangers that are obviously globally well known in Scotland, and then Feyenoord, the Dutch side, that are, kind of taking off at the moment. And, Ajax are no longer just the only club you think about in the Netherlands. So how did those partnerships come about, and also what specifically about both of those clubs stood out to you as sort of the right fit for what you were looking to do?
I think there's a combination of, for us, we looked at every partnership, especially at the beginning, twofold. One is, again, are you a transit club, meaning usually a Europa League, Champions League club, but not one of the top 10 globally, where you can get great exposure, where you've got a great training atmosphere, where you have a lot of tradition, but where you are eventually looking to move players on. So that was obviously one of the main reasons. We want somebody that fits with our identity, with not as much our identity as it really exists, but what we would like it to be. Obviously, Rangers are a football club for fans of football clubs. And that kind of is the way we certainly wanted to see ourselves Feyenoord is obviously in a spectacular league for player development in the right place. You know, those top 5 to 10 Dutch clubs do an exceptional job of player development. You know, we had a article, I think, in the Independent 3 4 years ago that called us, our model is the Ajax of the United States. And, you know, I think that's Ajax had a difficult year this year, obviously, but you know, that's the kind of model that when you think of the top Dutch clubs, they're just so professional and they really do a spectacular job of identifying talent. And then, you know, at the beginning for us, part of it was just, you know, being on the global stage, getting our name known, being in a picture. You know, our first coach at Rangers was Steven Gerrard, and you know, we signed that deal with Rangers and Steven Gerrard in the Orange County jersey next to the Rangers jersey. And that visual is as important as anything that we've done in 8 years, just to be recognized and identified. And, you know, it's a strange kind of dichotomy being a USL club. On one hand, you know, we are a second division club that plays in front of 5 to 10,000 people, and that's what most clubs in USL do. On the other hand, you know, when we did our player transfers, you know, for players like Kobe Henry and Credios Indina, when Kobe was the first USL player, active USL player ever to get called up to the men's national team, full team, we got, you know, billions of impressions in social media and hundreds of newspapers. And that's kind of the strange space that I think USL will continue to operate in as we become more and more a part of global football and the player transfer market. And, you know, and a lot of European clubs now coming in and looking to partner with or invest in USL, especially championship clubs. I think that's where this is all headed, is this weird kind of duality between playing for our local fans and our local community and being a part of this global market that when something happens, it goes instantly live on ESPN.
Yeah, definitely. I'm sure the mention of the Gerrard photo was more than you could imagine. I'm sure being referenced as the Ajax of the States was a big compliment. I think the only one bigger than that might be Borussia Dortmund, you know, who are just one step ahead, that they're developing and also a top Champions League, you know, competing team at the same time. That's awesome.
Very good for offering opportunities recently to young American players, which, you know, is a very important thing for us.
And I mean, to reference back to when we had Brett Johnson on the podcast, he was stating a lot of the same sort of, you know, future looking ideals for the league of really being this middle piece for European players to come and get a lot of minutes in a bit of a different environment. So I remember when we had that chat with him, the bullishness that he portrayed was very contagious to listen to, and just you couldn't not trust and believe, you know, what is coming ahead for USL as a whole, because obviously there's the 3 leagues and all of the potential that can bring. We've also had Jeremy Allenbo on, and we did throw the promotion relegation question at him to see what his thoughts were there. So yeah, it's been awesome to hear you speak as well about the league in that sort of light.
Yeah, look, it is an exciting time. I mean, we are, you know, over the last 3 years, we've transferred more players to Europe than any other club in the United States, including MLS. So, you know, on some level, we're proving our business model. On the other hand, it needs to, you know, it needs another 5 10 years to really penetrate so that those transfer values go up and the perceived value of our players in Europe. Again, when we, you know, transferred our first player, people didn't even know there was a second division team second division league in the United States. And it sounds kind of funny, but that was 4.5 years ago. So the way the world changes and how quickly things happen, you know, we've definitely taken a strong step And, kind of to go back to your other question, being with a Rangers, being with a Feyenoord, being identified globally. And then last year, we did our first crowdfund raise for in the United States, mostly for our local fans. We actually just launched another one in the UK 2 days ago. And again, like every other club, we need to raise funds, and that's part of the business. But for us, it really is also another way, A, to create exposure in the same way a transfer does around the world, and B, really a way to tie, fans to us. We have what we call the Southern California, Southern Florida problem in Orange County, which is that the majority of people are not born in either of those places, and they don't grow up from day one the way you would in the Midwest or the South or the Northeast as a fan of a team. They have 85 potential things they can do on a Saturday when the weather's sunny and 75 every day, and 5 different sports, and then you can drive up to LA or down to San Diego. It's not, nothing against Cincinnati, but when Saturday comes along during soccer season, there ain't that much else that you're going to do if you're a soccer fan. So it's a very different type of opportunity. And every time we can cement ourselves in people's minds, get them focused, get them remembering about us over and over again, we take every one of those opportunities.
And we'll certainly get to the crowdfunding, both on the US and the recent UK one as well. But on your note there of competing against things that aren't even sports, and talking about, how do you compete against people going to the beach, going to the mountains for a hike. If we go back to 2016, when there was only 150 fans coming to watch the games, what were some of those, I guess, more tactical efforts to grow the fan base from what was not non-existent, but obviously, very small, that you could fit in a couple of rooms if you had to? So what were some of the things you did right at the beginning to sort of build a bigger fan base?
I mean, I think there's a combination of, obviously there are a lot of football fans in Orange County, both, domestic and a lot of international. That was one area that was probably easiest to target in terms of just letting them know there's a professional team here and that we play high quality football. The second part is, which is both an opportunity and a challenge, is that there are hundreds of thousands of kids playing tournaments every weekend in Oceanside, at the Great Park in Irvine, though that didn't exist back then, at Norco and Silver Lakes. These are some of the biggest facilities and some of the biggest tournaments in the United States. So there are people there, and that they really love soccer, and there's a huge youth base. A lot of that is just about, getting them at the right times, and how do you talk to an audience that is going to be playing 4 games in 72 hours, and they just played 2 games. How do we get them out after their 2 day games in 80-degree weather to come out to a pro game? It's both an opportunity and a challenge, but they are there. So we built it, and enough of them came. So that's most of the soccer audience. Then I think, anybody who works in US sports for the most part, especially kind of up and coming sports, understands that we don't just sell soccer, we sell entertainment. And obviously MLS and some USL teams are taking that to the next level and kind of making their stadiums the focus. For us, it's just more focusing on people who have an affinity for soccer, but also basically are looking for live entertainment in Orange County, and family focused live entertainment in Orange County. And, we've done a really good job of, creating a mascot and then creating a series of events around Gnarly, our mascot, for kids. And we do a thing called Touch a Truck, which is basically we get about 50, 60 different trucks, fire trucks and construction cranes and police cars, and they all park in the parking lot. And, 3 to 7 year old kids come out in droves and climb on them and walk around, and then we have them funnel them into the soccer stadium after that. And that's been a successful event for us for 5, 6 years. I sold the team about 6 years ago on our first beer fest, which is something that I've always enjoyed, that they used to do at Paramount and Warner Brothers Studios in LA for 20 years. Where now this year we'll have 5 beer fests, and we consistently sell all of those out. And they really, A, people love beer. B, people love the association between the two, and it really brings a lot of people that are likely to enjoy our product into our stadium for the first time, just to stand there and hang out, on a nice day and have a couple drinks and watch some OCSC soccer.
You guys have definitely done one of the best jobs of kind of culturing and building that super loyal and new fan base out of all of the USL clubs that kind of came about during that era. Obviously now there's other teams that have done that as well. I'm sure that they've kind of copied some of what you guys have done, because once you guys found that home down there at Championship Stadium, everything kind of came together. And that's kind of where my question comes in is, one of the things that you said in the very beginning was when you took over the team, finding a place to play and getting that infrastructure set up was one of the more important things. And it did kind of happily coincide with the construction of Great Park and Championship Stadium. How important was that for you and the team to get into that stadium? And now you've had that as your home for coming up on a decade here. How important is that? Because I know a little bit about Championship Stadium. Been lucky enough to play there in my college career, as well as be there as a fan to see some games. And it's a beautiful piece of property. It's amazing, and you guys have done a fantastic job of making it your home. So how important was that? And then not only that, but being able to train nearby at those fields, how was that important for the club?
I think having a home ultimately is probably the most important thing. Our GM, who is now, I think his official title is the sporting director of USL overall, Oliver Rees, was the GM of OCSC for 8 years. And before that, he was actually the coach of the OC Blues, and has a 25-year history in that area. And really, he started practicing when there were only 2 Great Park fields before anything had been built. He really understood the plan. And, I come from a real estate background. And when he kind of showed me not just the master plan for, I don't even know how many, I think they've built 25 to 30,000 homes around there. And there's a lot more to come, but also for the sports park, for the stadium, for everything that was going in there. It was, a once in a lifetime opportunity. Um, as you can read a lot about in some articles in the LA Times and some other places, that nothing great comes without a fight. And some very unfriendly teams from up north were interested in trying to take that away from us. But, sometimes you got to fight for things. And we now have a great relationship with the city, and we're there for, 10 more years at least. And it makes all the difference in the world to have a home and to be identified with a piece of real estate that's that beautiful. And hopefully we'll be hosting some World Cup teams training and some other things very soon.
Yeah, that was kind of the next thing that I was going to ask about as well. Is we just spoke to Chris Canetti. He's the president of the Houston World Cup bid, and he talked to us very in detail about what goes on and what it takes to become a host city of the World Cup. And obviously, we know Los Angeles has been chosen as well. And since you guys have some of the best facilities in the area, I was just curious to know if you guys are going to be hosting anything like that. But it's really important that a team, especially one that's going to be producing these big time players, has good facilities, not only for that, but also for them to understand what it's going to take at the bigger stage and what they're going into. But my question for you is the US U20 national team just qualified for the U20 World Cup. I believe it's next year or the year after that. How important is that in terms of setting your players that you're developing kind of a goal like, hey, these are the things and look at this event that you need to go to and we want you to get there.
I think the entire, obviously, youth national team structure, starting at, especially starting at the U15s, is very important. It's important for your players to be recognized and to, find those opportunities. But obviously, the U20 World Cup, the 2023s, which are basically the Olympic teams, and the men's national teams are the most important. U17 is right behind there. We've had pretty consistently players on the U17. Most recently, I think Duran Ferre, who is our goalie, has been on that team. Kobe Henry was on that team. Karede Osundina was on the U9. I want to say, was it the U19 or the U20? And then Bryce was obviously, Jameson was on the U17 and played in all three of those games. So it's important for those players to be recognized, to be seen. And, there's a lot of criticism of US soccer, but one thing they have done, as USL clubs like ours have started to focus on developing players that we believe are world class and have a chance to play not only on a national but an international stage, they have more and more looked at those players and understood that talent comes from multiple levels of US soccer. And, Kobe Henry was kind of the first one. Once he kind of broke into those clubs, there's been a lot of players that have come up through, and, players like Diego Luna, who's now doing great at Real Salt Lake, and Winder at Benfica. There's a lot of these young players that have starred in roles for the national teams that, we couldn't get a call back 7, 8 years ago, but now they're really being recognized.
Yeah. And I'm sure that pathway has played a huge role into being able to recruit your own players, being able to sell, or pitch this better pathway to ultimately where they want to go. Then I guess MLS Next Pro might be, closer to a competition for the young players now. But before that was, do you want to go and play, U17 at an MLS club, versus now you can actually play professionally already, and sort of get in front of that spotlight. So I would assume that that's been very useful for you as well, as the league has grown. I know we had mentioned the fundraising, so I want to hone in on that, because we had a great kind of conversation with Stephen Aldrich about that as well, because obviously the Roots had a really successful one themselves. But it seems like you were sort of first in line to come up with that idea and really roll it out. So take us back to when that became an idea, of not only to build community, to build, a bit of, fan ownership, but fan allegiance. But yeah, take us back to coming up with that idea and how it looked to really roll that out. And then obviously the success that it has been so far.
I think we probably, from the beginning of the club, we've been looking for ways to get fans involved in ownership in some capacity. At some point, we've looked at a bunch of different opportunities, including, there are some coin-based systems that a number of clubs used in Europe that we could never get completely comfortable with. So this really was the first time we felt like there was a, SEC approved, organized system with a good platform, with no shadiness behind it, And, when we started talking to the Republic guys, and they had just purchased Feeders, which was obviously the platform in the UK that had been around for a while longer, had done a couple successful launches for UK-based clubs. The ability not only to do this, but to do it, on both sides of the pond really made a lot of sense to us. And again, allowed ultimately our fans, again, many of them aren't born in Orange County. They did not grow up with a football team there at all. And this game has to be about something more than a bunch of guys running around on a field for 90 minutes. And that's really, what you sense when you live all over the world. Football is really fan focused and locally fan focused, and everything else that comes alongside it with transfers and international play and all this other stuff. It's ultimately, you have to have that core base of nearly fanatical support. And that's kind of what we're trying to build, is supporters that are there all the time, that are engaged all the time, that want to be a part of something, not just come out to games and watch. So when we finally got this opportunity, we went out with gusto. I think we'll do it again in the US next year. We'll see what's going on in Europe, also potentially doing something there. But it ultimately is about building as large of a ownership base around the world as we can. And I think little by little, it'll do good things for us, but it'll also do good things for USL and US soccer. I think the perception oftentimes among especially UK fans, I guess really all French, UK, some other places, is American billionaires or private equity firms sweeping in and buying 100-year-old clubs with very little interest in the local fan base. I think what we're trying to present is something that's exactly the opposite. Is we're developing a local club in the United States, doesn't have much in the way of roots yet, but we want it to be built the right way, and we want it to be built on our fans and upon a kind of set of strategies and values that make this worth doing, because there are far easier ways to make money than running a soccer team. So if you're going to do it, it's got to be about something a little bit more.
Definitely. And I mean, I'd mentioned to Stephen when we had him on that I live maybe 70, 80 minutes away from Oakland, but and I've never attended a game, but I am one of the 3,000 odd, tiny minority owners, simply because of the club standing for more than just, 11 guys on a pitch just trying to get 3 points every weekend. But seeing that how a club can be a vehicle, for change in a community, for uniting a community. And it's clear that, you guys are capitalizing and moving, in the same way. But as we mentioned, 2 days ago, you announced that you're also going to do the same thing in the UK, which is obviously quite different to someone being in Orange County and wanting to support something that is near them and that they can go and watch if they, want to this weekend. But the UK is obviously very different. So how, I guess, one, how come you chose the UK aside from, just the Republic and like the connection, to get into that market, probably the easiest out of all of the European side of things. But how also does that strategy of trying to attract these, fan owners that maybe, to your point, don't even know there's a second division in the United States, and maybe more specifically have not heard of OCSC before?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think there's a combination of things. One is obviously the growth of football in the United States, and, MLS is obviously a very kind of corporate model. You could consider top down very much, owned by a lot of very wealthy individuals. And there aren't very many opportunities to own a piece of, what in 10, 20 years will be, if not the largest soccer market in the world, probably second or third. We always use the stat that I think it was when we started the club, the US was 0.1% of the global transfer market. Now they're about 1%, give or take. You look out 10 years, is that number 5%? Is that number 7%? I don't know. But it's a big number. And the demographics in the United States obviously favor soccer more than any other sport, especially among young people and especially a much more diverse demographic. And I think UK fans very easily recognize that. You know, it's like buying a railroad in the US in the 1870s. Like this is an opportunity to get in on something that's clearly going to grow a lot. And then I think the second part really is people like to be tied to something. They like to be an owner of something. It makes them feel like they're a part of a bigger story. And, you know, we're telling a different story than most of US soccer is. And, you know, even global football to a certain extent is a lot of large purchases and people coming from the top down. And we want to show that US soccer is also building from the ground up. And this is the type of team that we would like people to fall in love with. And, you know, we had some success, especially early on with the Scottish fans really kind of identifying with us. And we try to keep a great sense of humor about ourselves and a sense of humility. You know, we know we are a second division club that has only been selling players for 4 years and has won one championship. But we have a great sense of humor about ourselves when presenting US soccer to the rest of the world. And I think if you do that in a way that is humorous, not arrogant, and appreciative of, you know, something that's been around, we always say, you know, when I came up with the strategies for the club, there's nothing new or different that we did in Orange County. They've been doing the same things for 50, 100 years in the UK and across Europe. We just applied it in a US format. And that's kind of the same thing with us here. The next step is to really get as many people engaged in US soccer. You know, I don't expect somebody in the UK to fly out here every other weekend, but to want to tune into our games, to want to tune into our highlights, to check out our merch and, you know, proudly wear that stuff around the world. It's starting already in the United States where, you know, if you go on vacation somewhere, two Orange County fans spot each other across the room and get excited. We want that to kind of be around the world. And as we continue to grow and hopefully add good amount of seats to our stadium and, you know, watch our first player start for the men's national team, watch our first young player play in the Champions League, it's going to be a more and more exciting story.
Definitely, definitely. I mean, I'm very bullish on OCSC, just listening to yourself on top of everything, you know, that we had the pleasure to read and learn about the club recently. But I guess, you know, we've spent a lot of time looking backwards. And before we get into wrapping things up, you know, I just want to spend a quick couple of minutes thinking and looking ahead. So obviously, I'm sure, you know, you've sort of hit all of the goals, the kind of short and medium term goals of when you took over the club, of getting it into the very good position it is now. But what are some forthcoming big picture goals that you want to see for OCSC, you know, especially as we enter this sort of golden decade ahead of us in the country? How do you want to see OCSC positioned, you know, 10 years from now?
You know, I think there are some questions that are to some extent above my pay grade. But within the things that I can control, I think, you know, the continuing globalization, especially of USL and USL Championship, is something I think we're going to see more of in the next couple of years. We obviously have some partnerships. I think some of those partnerships between US clubs and international clubs are going to become a lot tighter and a lot more engaged. And, you know, that is an exciting thing for us. Obviously, we see teams, you know, pretty much every top UK team coming over here in the summer. with the recent relevant media against FIFA and US soccer lawsuit, looks like very soon we'll be seeing, multiple leagues playing league games within the United States. So you've got a lot more opportunity for us to be, not only kind of models, but also providers and be seen by a lot more international clubs as this becomes the United States, certainly for the next 2 to 4 years, becomes the hub of global soccer. We want to, which we're starting hopefully very soon, to build out our stadium, build out a lot more sections in there and make it far more of a target for friendlies that don't fall into the kind of Arsenal, Liverpool area, because I think what you're seeing in the US is that while the top teams are still able to draw when they play each other, many of the even right slightly below the top tier teams are not able to fill up, a 50,000 seat stadium, even a 20 or 15,000 seat stadium, and a 8 to 10,000 seat stadium that you can sell out and create an incredible atmosphere for is a place that a lot of these clubs will be able to go, make their trips profitable, grow their businesses, but also not have to play in front of a half or 3/4 empty stadium.
It's from everyone we've spoken to, it's the rocket ship that everyone's about to get on is exciting, and seeing what the legacy looks like post World Cup is going to be really exciting, and hopefully the women's side get their bid accepted as well, so that the women's side of the game can continue to just exponentially propel the way that it is right now. And the CBS deal is obviously, also a big, huge moment for USL of getting in front of domestic eyes as well, so that even more people start to recognize the potential and importance and value of what is the second division. Because when you look at all of the other major leagues in the country, no one really bats an eye or thinks about the second division. But in soccer, it's a whole different ball game. That USL is making some very, very good moves to sort of change that landscape. We've been making a bit of a tradition when we're wrapping up of going through just a few quick fire questions. So first one that we want to throw at you is, when it's a non-game day weekend or it's the off season, how are you spending your Saturdays when there's not an OCSC game to watch?
I have two relatively young kids, both of whom play soccer, and then the other plays soccer and basketball. So like most parents my age, that is where I spend the majority of my time, taking my kids to games and tournaments, and there is not much time other than that. We are also, I think this will be our 38th year as Clipper season ticket holders.
Oh, nice.
So, as we always say, we may not be very smart, but we're very loyal. So each and every year we show up for a lot of Clippers games, and that's our family tradition for many, many years.
That's awesome. Sports clearly is in the veins for the whole family. Second one, when it's not a home game and you're traveling for an away game for OCSC, what is your favorite USL stadium to get to go to?
Favorite USL stadium? I mean, I think the new stadium in Colorado is beautiful, beautiful setting. It's great. I think it's about 8,500 seats. It's perfect size. I think we had our league meetings there last year, and just absolutely everything about it is a real fit, and I would go back there anytime.
Excellent. Yeah. Yeah. What they're doing there, and we have some ties, David and I, to some of the, footballing staff at the club, to see firsthand, the development going on there is awesome. Last one to wrap us up and end on a nice bright note. What has been the most memorable moment so far during your journey with OCSC?
I mean, I think like every real football fan, winning the cup in 2021 in Tampa on an away field, going with my kids to midfield in front of all the banners and everything flying down, lying down right in the middle of the field and taking an over the top picture that we would never forget. Nothing else. Transfers are spectacular. Business is spectacular. Your first sellout was an amazing thing, but if you're in this game, ultimately you have to want to win championships, and that's what we had the opportunity to do, and hopefully we'll have the opportunity to do again.
Yeah, that was somewhat of a no-brainer question, and despite the sort of theme of this podcast being the business side, anytime we've thrown that question to someone who's been part of a championship winning team, the business gets set aside, and it's what the day-to-day work is all for, is pursuing those championships at the same time. So well, James, look, this has been awesome. We've spoken to people who have been a part of clubs from the beginning, but getting to hear your sort of context and what it's like to take over a club and rebrand it and move it into a new direction has been really interesting. And I'm sure anyone that's listening will get to see and learn about a new side of the game today. So thank you so much for your time, your insights, and obviously.
Absolutely. Thank you, guys. It was fun.
Thanks for watching this episode of Off the Pitch. Don't forget to drop a follow or subscribe on the podcast platform you're listening from. That helps us bring stories like these to your ears each and every week. And if you have a minute, leave a review as well, as that helps us grow the Off the Pitch community and bring even more exciting guests on. See you in the next one.